The former Reserve Bank economist Peter Tulip from the Centre of Independent Studies, who's been critical of the RBA's inflation fighting strategy and also its timing. He joins me now. Peter, always great to chat to you. What did you make of the Governor's performance in both of these testimonies this week?
I thought he handled it pretty well. That in the lead up to his parliamentary appearances, there was a lot of criticism in the media. He handled that very comfortably, as you said before. He had answers to a lot of those complaints. And I was actually a bit surprised that he wasn't pressed much on that. The opposition that he had got to the Barrenjoey meeting and the lack of communication, they didn't press that much. The politicians didn't press that much at all.
But is that really the biggest of the misjudgments by the Reserve Bank? Surely, as I pointed out there, misjudging the timing of inflation coming down, maybe even adding to the mood that maybe interest rates were peaking. These, to me, seem to be greater misjudgments even than that Barrenjoey briefing.
That's completely right, Ross. And that's a problem with these hearings, that they focus on cosmetic mistakes, the little things and the really big things that we care about whether a central bank is achieving, and the politicians should address is, are you meeting your targets?
Because even today, as we sit here, you've got the cash rate sitting at 3.35%, the inflation rate, the underlying inflation rate at 6.9%. The Reserve Bank was too slow to start raising interest rates, then took its foot off the brakes too soon in regards to those 0.5% rate cuts. These are the things that people should recognise, because this is the reason why there could be ongoing rate rises for quite some time.
Yes, and the Reserve Bank seems very sensitive to the pain that mortgage borrowers are feeling, and that's fine, but its main job is to get inflation back to the target. And as Phil Lowe said, if they don't do that quickly, they'll need to raise rates more in the future. So unless there is more pain at the moment, we'll get a lot more in the future.
But the odd thing is, I completely agree with that, because my point is not that they're raising the rates now to head off the inflation. My point is that they should have recognised it sooner, acted sooner, and not got behind the curve compared with their peers in other parts of the world.
I agree, Ross. And interest rates have risen faster and by more in most other countries. You're right.
What did you make in the hearing on Friday when the Reserve Bank Governor said that all of this publicity, that he really doesn't seek the publicity, that he wishes that the Reserve Bank was not on the front page of the papers and not in the media so much? I kind of think that given that interest rates and the housing markets are so sensitive to decisions of the Reserve Bank, it's inevitable. That's your job.
Yeah, and if he wants to stop being on the front page of the papers, he should stop making mistakes.
Or stop being the Reserve Bank Governor. That's another option as well. But he says he's going to stay for the 7-year term. So just explain to me, the politics around this. You can see Labor politicians really piling it on. Stephen Jones saying he hopes there are no more interest rate rises because they're worried about the hurt to families and so forth. But this is where the Reserve Bank Governor, where Philip Lowe, I think, explained this well. If you don't get rid of the inflation, as you say, the hurt goes on for much longer.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the partisan split. So Jerome Lexell, another Labor member of the Economics Committee, also was very critical of Phil Lowe prior to these meetings, but didn't bring home that attack. What I found most surprising in this week's hearings was the very strong defence from coalition senators in the Estimates Committee meeting on Wednesday. Phil Lowe was repeatedly asked, lovely softball questions like, aren't people being unfair in their criticisms of you? And don't you have lots of reasons to complain? And wasn't this criticism silly? All coming from coalition senators who were very keen to get behind Phil Lowe. We didn't see that partisan split today, which I suspect was because the ALP backed off. OK, so then we go to the economy as it sits right now, because quite clearly what we can see from the United States is there is sticking underlying inflation. If that occurs here in Australia, the Reserve Bank has got no choice but to keep going. That's the issue right now. And that risks, as he says, the narrow path that could tip Australia's economy over and lead to higher unemployment. This would be my big criticism of monetary policy at the moment, that at the moment the economy is overheating seriously, and I don't think they're doing enough about it. So they said today that they think a non-inflationary rate of unemployment is a bit over 4%. That's So we're well below that at the moment. The unemployment rate is unsustainably high, and it's only going to increase to something neutral by the end of the forecast horizon. That's not enough to get the inflation rate down from 7% down to 3%.
And there is the fundamental issue for Australia, because we do know that we might be 6 months behind, say, the United States. We can see the trends that are coming. Yes, inflation is falling, but then there's other things, like you suddenly get retail sales this week bounce because people are in jobs. They're affording these price rises. And while people have got jobs, they will afford the price rises. They will afford companies like Telstra, we've spoken to on the program today, raising their prices. Wesfarmers raising prices because they too have got costs going up.
And I mentioned the unemployment rate, but we're also seeing lots of big pressures from other sources. The electricity prices, anyone that's looked at their bill this last month will have had a terrible shock. But also rents is one of the biggest single expenses that many households have, and they're set to rise very, very quickly.
OK, so do we expect any change in tune from the Reserve Bank Governor between now and September, given the fact that Jim Chalmers has got the choice in the future as to whether he's reappointed or not, and you sense that some of those Labor members suggest that will be a no? Where does Philip Lowe go to set his legacy up as a Reserve Bank Governor?
That's a great question. I think it's shot. I mean, he's had several years now to deliver on an inflation target. He's missed for almost his entire tenure. It's going to be very difficult to save in the last few months.